Hello learners, I am Paulami Das and today we are going to learn about how language varies in everyday registers and academic registers and what could be its important educational implications. Register means all the factors that go into any discourse. In other words, everything that influences language choices in writing or conversation determines its register. It matters who is involved, what is the content of their discussion, what is the context and situation, and what method is being used to communicate. When the register is correct, we hardly notice it. It means that the language and grammar are being presented correctly for the type of written content or conversation. When the register is incorrect, we automatically notice it because the language does not sync with the purpose. A paper that starts with a sentence like, "I feel the research findings are awesome," would definitely raise an eyebrow in academic circles. Although this may be a possibly correct statement, it is written in a wrong register for a research publication. The language of academic writing differs from everyday speech, which generally uses informal language, hesitations, repetitions, and incomplete sentences. In a face-to-face situation, we tend to rely on the listener to give us gestures and bodily clues that reveal whether what we are saying has been understood or not. If not, we can pause and rephrase and try to explain ourselves in different way. In a written language, however, writers cannot anticipate the response of the readers and therefore the language needs to be more precise if we wish to communicate effectively and accurately. Since writers cannot respond to the facial gestures of their readers or their body gestures, they have to rely on words, syntax, sentence structures, and punctuation marks to express their full meaning. While learning language to communicate in their mother tongue, L1, or their medium of instruction in school, L2, in case the two are different, students tend to acquire the everyday register far more easily and quickly as compared to the academic register. And this naturally percolates into any kind of writing they do. Many teachers today lament the lack of formality in students' language, especially in academic writing. Ask any educator about the use of so-called texting language in student writing, and you are likely to hear a sigh or a complaint about the decline of their students' language use. The problem, however, is not about students' intentions, but awareness. In most of these cases, students write down their thoughts in response to academic prompts and questions without considering the element of language register. They are unaware of the fact that different registers and levels of formality should be used in different situations and scenarios. They possibly do not know how to customize their speaking or writing according to audience, topic, purpose, and medium of the discourse. As teachers, we need to train our students explicitly about how to adjust their language use based on these considerations. In this lesson, we will learn just that. J. Cummins in the late 20th century proposed that there are two dimensions of language proficiency: basic interpersonal communication skills, BICS, and cognitive academic language proficiency, CALP. Though Cummins has been criticized for creating a differentiation between the conversational ability and the ability to use language for advanced literacy in this model, this distinction helps us understand the interrelatedness as well as the distinctions between an individual's BRIC and CALP. According to Cummins, we use BRICS in our everyday life, in our conversation with family and friends, informal interactions with shopkeepers and receptionists, and casual chit-chat on Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, or other internet forums. Contrary to this, we use KALP to understand and discuss academic topics in the classroom and to read and write about these topics in assignments, examinations, and research publications. BICS is said to be used in context-embedded conversations. This means that the conversation is often face-to-face and offers many cues to the listener, such as facial expressions, gestures, and concrete objects of reference. KALP, however, is said to be necessary for context-reduced conversations. That means those that take place in classrooms where there are supposed to be fewer non-verbal cues and the language is more abstract and hence context-reduced. However, with the recent development of technological interactions, this face-to-face context can be often virtual and yet formal, as in a Skype interview, or informal but without bodily cues, as in a WhatsApp conversation. It is therefore better to conceive of BICS and KALP not as discrete categories but as lying in a continuum or oscillating on a pendulum, just like spoken and written modes of communication. Most teachers would agree that their students need support and explicit guidance to learn how to move from everyday spoken register to the formal academic language that are used in presentations or interviews. Academic writing is expected to display a mastery of an extensive vocabulary, a good command of grammar, a thorough knowledge of spelling and punctuation rules, and an ability to put ideas and arguments down in a logical manner, all of which need extensive and extended practice. Moreover, according to Cummins, KALP is integrally connected to cognitive and memory skills, and therefore this makes it all the more difficult for students trying to acquire a mastery over KALP in L2. To understand this even further, let us take the help of the examples Angel Lin uses in her book chapter named How Language Varies, Everyday Registers and Academic Registers 2016. We will read and try to understand which of these two texts are more associated with a BICS context and which is more associated with a KALP's context. Text A. Hello Adrian. Good morning Angel. How are you today? I'm fine. I've been up for a couple of hours working on my computer. Oh, that's good. Are there lessons for me to see today? Miss Bushy hasn't replied to my email yet. Don't know if she's got something arranged. I see. In that case, I'd like to stay home to work this morning, and if she's got back to you, just give me a call and I'll come to school. No problem. Have a productive day. Thanks, Adrian. You have a good day too. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Now that was a conversation between Adrian and Angel. Text B. Flowering plants are classified as high-class plants. At the adult stage, they produce flowers which develop into fruits and seeds after being pollinated and fertilized. Tulips, water lilies, mangoes, and bananas are examples of flowering plants. Based on these two passages, Lin asks us to compare text A to text B in terms of content and the overall communicative purpose. Let us try to infer the different kinds of context where each text is likely to occur. For text A, we could ask, what are Adrian and Angel talking about? What's their role relationship likely to be? What's the channel or medium of this exchange? How is this talk organized into stages? Is the text originally in spoken or written mode? What is the purpose of and what has been achieved in this conversation? Well, for text B, we could ask, who is likely to be the author? And to whom is the author writing this text? What is the role relationship between the author and the reader? What's the channel or medium of the text? How is the text organized into stages? Is the text originally in spoken or written mode? Lin explains that while our conceptions about BICS and KALP would provide broad orientations in understanding the differences between these two text pieces, we would need the help of a theory of language, and in particular, Michael Halliday's and Ruqayyah Hassan's work in register theory, as well as Tim Martin's and David Jones' work in genre theory, to understand the differences of these text pieces in terms of functional linguistics. For example, how are they different in terms of choices of vocabulary and grammatical patterns? Which text seems to be easier to understand and produce? If someone is learning English as his or her L2, what are the different kinds of linguistic patterns that this person needs to master in order to participate competently in these different kinds of contexts? Is there a meta-language to discuss these linguistic patterns? Meta-language meaning a special language to talk and think about language. Halliday and Hassan's register theory mentions three concepts which are crucial to understand register. Field, what's the subject matter? Tenor, who is involved? And mode, what's the channel? While producing a text, we are subconsciously making choices about different vocabularies, grammatical patterns, and different ways of organizing or structuring the text depending on the overall purpose and situation of the communication. Deravienka further suggests that the choices we make in a text depend on, number one, the relationship between the participants, the speaker-listener, reader-writer, that is the tenor, the subject matter of the text, that is the field, and the channel of communication, written or spoken, that is the mode. This analysis of register theory must be understood in sync with the genre theory developed by Martin and Rose of the Sydney School. They posit culture at the center of their analysis. Culture implies different conventional ways of doing things or different social processes, including different ways of organizing texts to achieve social purposes. This determines their genres. Rose and Martin define genre as, I quote, staged, goal-oriented social processes. They claim genre to be staged and goal-oriented because text in a particular genre typically goes through different rhetorical stages to achieve its primary goal or social purpose. To understand how genre and register theories deepen our understanding of register, let us go back to the two text pieces in question. This figure shows an analysis of the rhetorical stages or schematic structure or genre structure of text A. It can be seen that the primary communicative or social purpose of the exchange seems to be one of the requesting information and action and responses to these requests and goes through a recognizable sequence of stages. Greetings, opening casual talk, request for information, response offering information, again request for information or action, and response offering a promise, and closing sequence. The primary goal of such a dialogic flow of workspace requests is to receive information and elicit action. Similarly, the genre or schematic structure of text B would look something like this. It offers a simpler but nonetheless recognizable sequence of stages to achieve its purpose: introduction by classification, description, and exemplification. The primary communicative purpose of text B seems to be that of providing a description of the topic. To understand how register theory can help us analyze how a text is patterned and crafted or constructed, let us ask the following questions. How do differences in the three dimensions, field, tenor, and mode, of the context of communication affect the choices made among the lexical, that is vocabulary, and grammatical patterns? While text A seems to be about the arrangement of lesson visits in a school, the field, between Angel and Adrian, who seem to be friends or colleagues, the tenor, text B is about a school science curricular topic, flowering plants, the field, and the writer of the text seems to be using a formal tone addressing the reader, who is likely to be a student reading the text, the tenor. Text A takes the spoken mode, which is the usual mode in everyday social interactions, while text B takes the written mode, which is common in school or academic contexts. It can be seen that text A exemplifies the casual, fluid language characteristic of spoken mode, while text B exemplifies the heavily crafted, compressed written mode. Comparing the two texts, we find that everyday conversations seem to be characterized by the use of shortened forms. For example, I've, first and second personal pronouns, I, you. Simple sentences, for example, I'm fine, and exclamations, for example, oh, that's good, hesitations, okay, and a relative lack of technical terms. These lexical and grammatical choices have the potential of communicating personal and emotional involvement. Although the exchange does not take place in a face-to-face conversation and is mediated by a telephone, the here and now context still seems to be shared by the conversation participants. Angel and Adrian, who are engaged in synchronous dialogic communication, taking turns to speak to each other. The participants also seem to share a lot of tacit background understanding and knowledge about the subject matter, the field being discussed. In contrast, a school science textbook, which belongs to the genre of descriptive report, is characterized by a higher frequency of technical terms, for example, pollinated, fertilized, use of passive voice, complex sentence patterns. For example, at the adult stage, they produce flowers which develop into fruits and seeds after being pollinated and fertilized, and a general lack of personal pronouns. These lexico-grammatical choices have the effect of communicating detachment or social distance, that is to achieve a specific value on the dimension of tenor. In fact, the text producer, the writer of the text B, is usually not the here and now context of the text receiver, the reader of the text B. The communication is asynchronous and the text is more monologic than dialogic. Although a good writer often has the reader in mind and anticipates the reader's possible needs and points of views as the writer produces a text. Also, comparing the two texts from the angle of speech acts or rhetorical functions, we see some everyday interpersonal speech acts such as request, response, promise in text A, whereas text B involves the functions of classifying, describing, and exemplifying an entirely academic interest, flowering plants. One can say that text A is an example of everyday register, while text B is an example of academic register. In functional linguistic terms, we can say that the authors of these two texts have made different linguistic choices to achieve different sets of values on the dimensions of field, tenor, and mode in the two different registers. To sum it up, we can say that texts are organized and constructed in different ways according to their genre, which is purpose, and register, field, tenor, and more. The genre shapes the overall organization of the structuring of the text, the stages through which a text unfolds to achieve its overall purpose, while the register shapes the lexico-grammatical patterns or linguistic choices made in constructing the text. In other words, language in use in authentic contexts is not one single homogeneous identity, everyday language and academic language, but a repertoire of genres and registers which are chosen accordingly to the overall communicative purpose and the aspects of field, tenor, and mode in different contexts of communication, from genre selection to lexico-grammatical choices to grapho-phronological choices, which means spellings, font type, size, or which pronunciation and intonations to use, etc. All these choices have important implications. For example, if we have a framework that describes how language varies, that is how texts vary according to the users, according to the use and according to the mode, then we can systematically design our curriculum material to help students master these variations in language patterning or linguistic features in different contexts. For example, shifting confidently between everyday and academic contexts, which are, however, not discrete binary categories but often lying in a continuum. The discussion up to this point might make this impression that spoken mode is often associated with everyday registers and the written mode is strongly associated with academic registers. However, this does not need to be the case. For example, in everyday interactions, we are increasingly using written email and asynchronous communication to supplement face-to-face or mediated conversations, synchronous communication. In academic contexts, there are also important spoken modes of communication. For example, oral presentations, lectures, seminars, discussions that go side by side with written communication. Increasingly, multimodality, that is, using multiple modes of communication, including spoken, written modes and images, pictures, music, videos, gestures, characterize both our everyday and academic communication. With this discussion, Lynn leads us to another consideration about language register in the work of Ahmad Mahmood. Mahmood, in an essay in the edited volume, The Evolution of Englishes 2014, has proposed a useful framework to capture the crisscrossing of these different continua along the dimensions of field, tenor, and mode. The figure shows Mahmood's conceptualization of how the continuum of spoken written words crisscross with the continuum of social distance between the users. Language users can be said to be located on a social tenor continuum between the global and the local poles. For example, family members and friends living in the same locale can be said to be located closer to the local pole of the social distance continuum. International businesses, clients can be said to be located closer to the global pole of the social distance continuum. In the figure on the left-hand side, in the local written or local oral quadrants, we can find texts such as local newspapers, magazines, fiction, textbooks, radio and television. These are usually mediated in the local familiar languages of the language users, can be in the first language of the home or the local community languages. On the right-hand side of the diagram, in the global written and global oral quadrants, we can find texts which could be like international newspapers, journals, textbooks, fictions, business conferences, and media. One aspect of this framework that is interesting to discuss is the ontological development of language, that is, the individual's trajectory of language development. We all, regardless of which first language we speak, develop language first in the everyday, local, and oral contexts, that is, the family and the local community, and then develop understanding of language use in the other domains, including technical and specialized ones, often through formal education. This relates to Cummins' notion of Bix and Scalp as well as Sidney's school of genre and register theory. That is, we all first develop Bix in our local familiar languages, L1s, and then later we learn to communicate with CALP, both in our familiar first local languages and in L2, L3, all the additional languages, usually through formal education. Likewise, we can also learn Bix in an additional language with formal instruction. However, it is also possible to pick up Bix as an additional language, such as in a situation of an immigrant child in a host country or the context of multi-ethnic or multilingual neighborhoods. Mahmood's framework draws on the three concepts field, tenor, mode of register theory to map out the diverse possibilities of how language and texts vary according to the different aspect of the context of language use. The social linguistics current consensus about how language and texts vary can thus be summarized as follows. In this framework, we can identify 8 different domains in which language varies depending on the combinations of different values on the 3 dimensions of field, tenor, mode of the context of communication. The first 4 domains include language variations that reflect local usage, and they can vary in the following ways: local everyday written, local everyday oral, local specialized written, local specialized oral. This local use can be done in one local language or multiple local languages depending on the context. For example, one might use one or many local languages in the marketplace or using everyday written languages in a poster looking for a lost pet in the neighborhood. Likewise, examples of local specialized written usage can be found in the newsletters and websites of local societies or in a particular political discourse. In Mahmood's 3 dimensional framework of language variation. The other 4 domains involve global usage that varies with the dimensions of written or oral and the dimensions of everyday or specialized. Global everyday written, global everyday oral, global specialized written, and global specialized oral. These 4 domains of language usage differ from the first 4 domains in that they refer to contexts of language usage where participants need to communicate with people who do not share their local ways of using language. Globally oriented everyday written usage, for example, can be found in international editions of newspapers and magazines which avoid local colloquialism to make the text accessible to the wider community of readers. Global everyday oral usage can be found in interactions between people coming from different parts of the world when they are conversing about everyday casual topics. In contrast to global everyday usage, global specialized usage is involved when people coming from different parts of the world discuss specialized topics in a paper presentation session in an international academic conference. This can involve spoken usage, that is, academic presentations and discussions in specialized conference, or written usage, that is, international research journal articles. In using this framework, however, it must be pointed out that there is a considerable variation within each of these 8 domains depending on the specific aspects of each context of communication. This framework, however, provides us with an overall socio-linguistic roadmap to chart out the different possible domains in which a student will need to develop different appropriate kinds of language proficiencies and registers. The framework can thus essentially inform our work in curriculum planning, although more research is needed to further elaborate this framework. Mahboob has pointed the possible way forward in our efforts to build an integrated model to analyze important features of everyday and academic registers, a distinction first proposed in Bix and Kalp concepts of commons. The next question to ask would be, how are Kalps in different languages like L2, L3, L4 similar or different? Would a good foundation in Kalp in one language be beneficial to learning Kalp in another language? To address this question, we can draw insights from the genre theory and register theory. From the systematic functional linguistic perspective, we can see language as a system of systems of choices, that is, nestled systems for meaning making, that are different choices to be made at different systemic levels. The more global textual level, genre structuring, and the more local lexicogrammatical level. The textual level involves choices of different ways of structuring the text through stages to achieve the overall communicative purpose of the text, while lexicogrammatical level involves choice of words, clauses, sentence patterns to signal different values on the dimensions of the field, tenor, and mode, that is, register. What would a student gain by having a good grasp and foundation in Kalp in both spoken and written modes in one language when he or she approaches the task of learning Kalp in another language, and vice versa? Lin foregrounds that students who have developed a good foundation in Kalp in one language are likely to have an enhanced metalinguistic awareness of how language works and varies across different contexts. They will be more likely to be aware that Kalp involves the need to instantiate a certain set of values in academic registers, that is, the need to turn dynamic processes into static entities, and different languages offer different concrete lexicogrammatical choices to achieve them. Therefore, a mastery of Bix and Kalps in the first language or the mother tongue, L1, would only facilitate a better development of Bix and Kalp in L2 and other additional language, rather than impeding it, as is commonly believed today. This is similar to Cummins' notion of surface features of L1 and L2. An academic science text describing flowering plants is likely to have a similar overall purpose and textual structuring, whether it is in L1 or L2. Given the increasing globalizing trends in academic discourse, the genres and texts in academic context across different societies are likely to be sharing more similarities than differences. School genre theory have analyzed numerous school texts and come up with systematic taxonomies of recurring school genres so that school teachers can provide their students with explicit support and guidance in learning to read and write in different school genres. It would be helpful for students to learn about register, especially if they come from culturally and linguistically diverse homes, as in the case in India. However, skipping a level suddenly from one register to another might sometimes be inappropriate and offensive. So the first register is a frozen or a static register. This register rarely ever changes. Examples of frozen registers would be the Pledge of Allegiance or the preamble of the Constitution. Next is formal or academic register, which includes academic language from speeches, proclamations, and formal announcements. The third is a consultative register, which is formal and acceptable speech often used in professional settings between teachers and students, judges and lawyers, doctors and patients, and between a superior and a subordinate. Casual register is one that we use between friends and peers and involves informal language, includes slang and colloquialism. And finally is an intimate register, which is used between parents and children and siblings and intimate people like spouses. In the context of school and instruction, it is important to note that students ought to be made aware of these 5 registers and when to use them. But perhaps most importantly, they should be taught how to frame their content in the first 3 registered just listed. Students will encounter the language in the frozen or static register as they study social sciences. However, they will register the formal or academic language when they use it for close reading of analysis of texts. And finally, a consultative register between interactions with teachers, administrators, and guest speakers. Utilizing and practicing these registers allows students to incorporate skills such as interviewing a professional or practicing being interviewed for a job or speaking formally to another. While explicitly teaching students about the 5 registers may not be a top priority for teachers, making their students aware of the various contexts would serve the task. The language involved in these registers provide rich opportunity for teachers for language and content instruction. This brings us to the end of our discussion on academic and everyday registered. But before we conclude, let us quickly enumerate the 4 parameters that potentially determine register: audience, topic, purpose, and location. We ought to make our students super aware of these concepts so that they can develop the skills to use appropriate register in appropriate places and develop their everyday and academic communication skills with effectiveness and ease. Hope you enjoyed learning with me. Bye-bye.